Hey everyone, welcome to today's episode. Today I'll be talking about a very interesting topic called ITDR or Identity Threat Detection and Response. I've been hearing about this topic, I've been discussing about this with some of the colleagues and friends that I know in the industry. So I thought I'll study this topic and clarify some of the things that are happening around us and why people are confused. Okay, so let's get started. I will talk about the definition. We'll look at the current state of identity infra. We'll also talk about the need for ITDR. We'll look at the capabilities that are offered by today's ITDR systems. We'll also understand who's talking about ITDR, how is it different from EDR and XDR, and I'll, in the end, summarize what we've learned. So, starting with the definition. So, as per Gartner, ITDR is a security discipline that encompasses threat intelligence, best practices, and knowledge based tools and processes to protect identity systems. It works by implementing detection mechanisms, investigating suspicious posture changes, activities, and responds to attack to restore the integrity of the identity infrastructure. Well, that seems complex. A simple definition could be ITDR refers to a combination of security tools and processes required to protect identities and systems that manage them. So essentially, ITDR platforms focus on protecting the identities and the systems that are managing those identities. This term has emerged in recent years in response to the explosion of distributed identities beyond traditional network perimeters. What that means is that if you today are working in any enterprise, you will realize that you have accounts on public cloud, you have accounts on SaaS applications, you have accounts on various other systems in the infrastructure. Okay, and the identity infrastructure is highly distributed today, and because of this there is a lot of attack surface in terms of configuration and again identity related threats. I'll talk about all this. Okay, so ITDR essentially is a system that helps to protect the identities and the infrastructure that's managing those identities. Okay, but before we get deeper into ITDR, let's understand what's the current state of identity infra, essentially what or how identity infrastructure is available in a common enterprise today. So the identity infra, also known as IAM system, identity and access management system, they are used for identity and access provisioning, authentication, single sign-on, permission or entitlement creation and validation. I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say there's an employee that joins in an organization. The IAM system will be used to give him permission to create his account so that he can log in, give him permissions to log into various applications, decides permissions within those applications and on what he can and cannot do, and do single sign-on so that he doesn't have to enter password or another authentication every time he accesses a different app. So example, if he is using intranet or some other app in the organization, let's say a CRM, it doesn't have to log in multiple times. Also, authentication is also part of overall IAM strategy, which is ensuring that there is a strong authentication beyond password, also called as multi-factor authentication, in place to prevent from password or credential stealing attacks. Okay, so that's the very high level definition of how IAM systems are used. Okay, now IAM systems are in an organization are typically deployed in a multi-layer approach. So there are systems that will focus on prevention and detection and response. Okay, so let's talk about that. So access management is used, MFA is used, or multi-factor authentication, IGA, identity and access governance, that these platforms or solutions typically validate permissions of these identities. PIM and PAM, privilege identity and access management solutions, they focus on administrators or users with higher privileges in the infrastructure. They record everything that the highly privileged users are doing on these systems, mostly for compliance and security reasons. And then there is also risk-based adaptive authentication system, which is they monitor what you're trying to do in an application, and based on that Another level of authentication can be set. It can be biometric, it can be OTP, etc. Typically things that you see in banking application when you are accessing. Okay. Now, to find issues in the current identity infrastructure, what organizations do is they are continuously doing an audit. They're looking at the identity infrastructure completely and trying to find issues in them. So they look at exposure check, who's got right permissions, if that person has moved into a different role, are those accounts or permissions really needed. So also call as entire process of JML, joiner, mover and leaver process. Okay. Then there's activity monitoring done at SIM level, UEBA, XDR level. Also PIM and PAM have their own activity monitoring. They collect logs from the infrastructure, identity infrastructure solutions, and they send alerts if there is an issue. Okay. There's always a configuration or misconfiguration analysis done to compare the current state versus the best practices. And there is the CIM field or the CIM domain, which is focused on identities in the cloud. So these platforms check excessive permissions in the cloud infrastructure. They're typically part of CIM, the CNAP platforms, if there is a CNAP vendor providing them, but also identity vendors provide CIM products. On that note, don't forget to look at my CNAP podcast or the YouTube video. I highly recommend looking at it. Cloud native application protection and AppSec are the future in the cybersecurity space. Okay, so some of these techs, going back to the identity side, some of these techs have use cases that will overlap. Okay, now remember we just spoke about how current identity infrastructure are used. Okay, this is the infrastructure you manage, but what the SOC teams or the security teams in the organizations do, they also monitor open internet and dark web for sale of leaked credentials. So credentials could be lost by employees using attacks like phishing, spear phishing, and these credentials are often sold on dark web or sometimes leaked on open internet. And SOC teams typically monitor this using digital risk protection platforms. This capability is offered by focused companies. Okay. Now, if there is an issue that is found, like let's say there is a highly privileged user that's trying to do something malicious, there will be a ticket opened in an ITSM tool. The platform can also integrate with the SOAR platform, and automated response can be taken. So essentially, the current approach is that there are dedicated systems for identity, access management, provisioning, configuration issue detection, threat activity detection. All response is done using a ITSM or a SOAR platform. Okay, that's the summary of what is happening in the enterprises today. Okay, now let's look at why do we need ITDR. So one thing you have to understand is that identity-based attacks are very common. A lot of organizations claim that they are new. Identity is a new perimeter. No, it's been there for years. For 2 decades, I've been hearing about this ever since I've been in cyber. In fact, recent breaches like SolarWinds, Colonial Pipeline, and Uber all had identities being compromised. According to the Verizon data breach report for 2023, 52% of all data breaches involved some sort of identity compromise. This report also stated that the number of incidents have been increasing. So in 2022, there were 2.9 million identity compromise incidents, up from 2.5 million in 2021. Also, Gartner predicts that by 2023, which is this year, 75% of security failures will result from inadequate management of identities, access, and privileges, up from 50% in 2020. Okay, so these identity related issues are common. Okay, and so are the threats. So what are the threats related to identity itself? These are brute force, privilege escalation, unusual user activity, credential scanning, password spray, and related attacks like privilege escalation, lateral movement. Okay, so an identity threat typically focuses on circumventing, bypassing, or abusing identity system in order to enable a cyber attack. Okay, so if somebody loses an identity, the cyber criminal can use this identity to move laterally in the organization. They can escalate their privileges to perform highly sensitive tasks. Okay, they can uh, do more malicious activity in the organization. Okay, uh, the second category of identity related threats is the attack on identity infra itself. So if an attacker goes after the authentication system, MFA, the IGA directory, the PIM-PAM solutions, to be able to create backdoor accounts, or to reset the infrastructure, get into a high privilege mode, all those attacks are on the identity infra. Uh, a common attack has been MFA prompt bombing. This is new. I've seen incidents in last 2-3 years where MFA prompt bombing has increased multifold. Okay. Now also, as I said earlier, modern identity infra is complicated, multiple clouds, multiple systems, and shadow IT. Okay, developers can create accounts for getting faster access to the applications and carry out things that's without going through a proper validation and approval process. Okay, that's quite a reality. Now let's look at the ITDR system. Okay, so the main use case that ITDR covers is that it prevents and detects credential theft or essentially identity related attacks on identity infra and risky entitlements that create attack paths. So how this works is it integrates with the existing identity and infrastructure systems. I mentioned products like access management, IGA, PAM, MFA, etc. Okay, it also integrates with some of the other infrastructures, security products like endpoint protection, EDR. It can integrate with network traffic based system, NDR based system. It can integrate with your cloud infra. Okay, and it understands the permission, configuration, and connections between accounts. Okay, and it can also aggregate and correlate data across this system. So in summary, what's happening is ITDR platforms are integrating with your current identity infrastructure and other infrastructure security systems and correlating that data. Okay, now once that data is correlated, the ITDR platforms does three things. Okay, it has a detection engine, so essentially it uses machine learning, behavior analytics, and anomaly detection. Okay, so it will learn from the data that's incoming. It will do profiling of that data, build a baseline, and alert if there is an anomaly there. And it also provides attack surface visibility, so it can highlight identity specific issues, things like accounts without MFA, excessive permission, shadow users, root accounts, shadow directories, etc. Then it can also tell expose credentials on dark web, the use case we spoke about earlier, which is credentials available on dark web for sale. Now personally, I've not seen an ITDR products, although ITDR is a system, as you can imagine. I mean, essentially it's an approach or a discipline, but there is a lot of product companies are claiming to be in ITDR. This use case is not covered by them, but as part of the discipline, this use case is very important. You should understand where your identities are, what are the attack surface related to identities. Okay, so as part of the organization approach, it should be there. This particular use case of exposed credentials on dark web has to be there. Now going back to the ITDR detection capabilities, the ITDR system also analyzes the identity infrastructure. So it can tell you if this infrastructure is deviating or is drifting from a baseline, a golden template, or a best practice configuration. It can detect an alert on identity related misconfiguration in real time. So someone creates an account with higher privileges or does a configuration which is not recommended by the service provider or the maker of that product, the system will give a real time alert. Okay. It also does real time threat detection by monitoring all access to accounts in the identity infra as well as across assets, apps, and other infrastructure. So example, If it integrates with a VPN solution, it can tell if the user is coming from a different country where he's not supposed to be, there is no office present. And remember, this use case is also already done by SIM, okay? But identity detection and response system takes it to the next level. I give you a very simple use case of a geolocation mismatch. Okay, ITDR system can also help you do a complete users analysis from authentication point of view. You can build a profile. You can say, hey, Prashant is a user. He typically logs on to VPN at this hour. He's active between, say, let's say 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Okay, and he is accessing these particular systems, and typically he doesn't work on weekend. Okay, so it helps you build a profile of that user. Now, some of you from SOC background could be wondering why ITDR is doing some of the things that are done by UEBSM. I'll come to that. Okay, so going back to the second part, which was analytics and detection on one, understanding what are the identity related threats. Second is the configuration of the identity infrastructure itself. Now remember, SOC or the tools like SIM, UEBA, they don't get into the identity infrastructure configuration related issues. They are looking at some of the use cases from threat detection perspective. Okay, whereas ITDR looks into these attack surface visibility, it looks into the issues related to configuration of the identity infrastructure, also real-time threat detection. So some use cases will overlap with SIM system, identity systems. Okay, but ITDR is a discipline that encompasses all these capabilities with the goal of preventing and detecting issues related to identity theft and identity infrastructure exploitation. Okay, now the third thing the ITDR does is it has proactive response capabilities, or it has playbooks to respond to these identity related threats. So it can do things like contain and eradicate. So examples like it can disable ID sync jobs between directories, on-premise targets, and cloud user repository targets. It can stop all account chases in IGA and PAM. It can quarantine users. It can restore backup. It can collect evidence for investigation and prevention, including PAM, IGA, access management logs. It can remediate by doing things like resetting affected credentials, removing rogue and excessive accounts, rotate security keys, update prevention and detection. Okay, so these are some of the use cases from response perspective. I've not covered all of them. I'm sure you realize. So if I have to summarize the ITDR capability, one is by integrating with various identity and other infrastructure solution, it is doing analysis in terms of understanding issues with the identity infra, attack surface monitoring, as well as real-time threat detection, followed by a response if something is found. Okay, I hope that was clear. Now, who's talking about this? Okay, so I found articles from IAM, IGA, PAM providers. They are more focused on analytics of the identity system with limited inputs from systems like EDR. So their focus is on identity infra. So if you see an ITDR white paper or a blog from a solution provider or a product provider in the identity space, they will be more focused on finding issues within the identity infra and also real-time threat detection. Okay, identity related theft, they will have limited use cases. Okay, the second category of providers who are talking about ITDR is the EDR, XDR, SIM, UEBA providers. Their focus is on identities by doing activity analysis by integrating with the identity infra. So they will integrate, for example, with Active Directory, understand what attacks are happening, who's logging in. Okay, they will try to match patterns, build baseline, all that. Okay, now the advantage that these products get is they can give you a multi-dimensional view of identity by correlating data from device. So example, you can say Prashant's ID is found on a critical system, and before authentication, a malicious process got executed on Prashant's system. Okay, analyst doesn't have to jump into consoles of various systems to understand this. So they give you a multi-dimensional view. The third category of providers that I've seen talking about ITDR is the infra security providers like SASE, SSC vendors. They are trying to build capabilities because they have data related to application activity, authentication activity. They don't have data related to IAM, IGA providers, and some of them don't have related data related to EDR. So in those cases, they're doing those partnerships, integrations to take that data and give a ITDR view. Okay. Now, based on these three categories, you will see different strengths. What you have to realize is the comparing ITDR products based on the three capabilities that I mentioned earlier. Okay. Now, what you also have to understand is context will always be the king. Okay. So the more context a platform can take, the better justices will do with the ITDR use cases. So example, if ITDR system can take the application context. So if, I'll give you an example, if there's a dev or test app deployed on a public cloud and it has user accounts with root privileges and internet connectivity, the ITDR system should be able to understand that it's a dev or UAT system. It's not a production system. Now compare that to an alert which says this is a production app with star.star entitlements and has a successful brute force attack. So the priority of the dev test app based alert versus an alert on the production app will be completely different. Okay. So hence it's important that these systems should be able to send data both towards left and right, which means all the systems should be able to integrate properly, share the context. Of course, Open API will be very important to build this context, but I don't believe that those capabilities are still there. I've not seen anyone talking about this also. Okay. And one of the reasons could be ITDR has started coming up in last few years only, and these things are under development. Now, how is it different from EDR and XDR? So EDR, as you guys know, they collect data from endpoints like computers and laptops to identify and respond to malicious code. Okay. They are focused on endpoint related activity and they add users context to it. XDR solutions are built on EDR. They are evolution of the current EDR SIM technologies, and they collect data from wide range of sources beyond endpoint like network, cloud, application, email, etc. And they give you a comprehensive view. On that note, don't forget to look at the XDR content that I've put up on the channel. Okay. Now, ITDR monitors and analyzes user activity. I'm sure you guys have understood now. ITDR is focused on identity. It collects data from identity infra. Okay. So it complements EDR and XDR in overall threat detection and response approach for an organization. So what ITDR is doing, it has added detection and response capabilities by reading data from existing identity infrastructure. Okay. Now, what I see definitely is that in coming months or years, ITDR vendors who can put more context, connect more dots, make it easy for both identity infrastructure owner, application owners, and also the SOC teams to understand identities, the better it will be. Okay? I'm sure this future will come. All these systems that I've understood, they are SaaS based platforms, and that gives them capability to process data, large amount of data at scale. Okay, and with large amount of data using the modern algorithms, it is easier to connect the dots and find issues. Okay, so I hope the difference between ETDR, EDR, and XDR is clear. Now, summarizing. So ITDR is a discipline. It provides threat detection and response for identities and infrastructure that manages them. Remember this definition. Okay. It will take time to build a single integrated platform that can do this completely. But as you can imagine, a framework-based approach can be used to handle. We are already doing it. It's right now not as cohesive as you would want, and that's why ITDR was created. But we are moving forward in the right direction. Eventually, it's all about ensuring that an organization adopts a zero trust based access approach, ens- ensuring that anyone connecting to the enterprise is always monitored, and threats are detected in real time and responded in the real time by the system itself, or the infrastructure layer itself. So zero trust is a very important thing. Okay. With that, I'm thankful to everyone who's been listening to the podcast and taking notes. Uh, Please share, like, and drop comments on my YouTube channel or on Twitter. My handles are there in the description. Let me know what else you would want to hear about. Soon I'll be covering AppSec. This is a space I'm very interested in. I've been reading about it, and I'm soon going to share my learnings about this space. With that, thank you so much. I'll see you next time.